Hello and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Stephanie Jansky, the Director of Programming here, and it's my honor to welcome all of you to our final candidate forum of this 2014 election season. With us today is Treasurer of Ohio Democratic candidate Connie Pillich. The Republican in this race, incumbent Josh Mandel, declined our invitation and will not be present. Still, we are pleased that State Representative Pillich is here to discuss the important issues facing Ohioans and the office of Treasurer of Ohio. She was elected as a state representative for the 28th District in 2009 and is currently serving her third term. Representative Pillich is an armed forces veteran, having served 8 years on active duty in the United States Air Force, achieving the rank of captain. She served in support of Operations Desert Storm and Desert Shield. Among the many military honors Representative Pillich earned was an Officer of the Year award at Tempelhof Air Base in West Berlin, Germany. She is a 3-time recipient of the Air Force Commendation Medal. She holds an undergraduate degree from the University of Oklahoma, obtained her MBA from the University of North Dakota, and is a graduate of the University of Cincinnati's College of Law. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and members of the City Club of Cleveland, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Representative Connie Pillich.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for filling up this room to come hear a little bit about the treasurer's race. And thank you very much to the City Club for organizing this. I'm very, very proud to be part of a 102-year-old tradition now of bringing civic discourse into the public venue. So, first of all, I want to, I just want to say thank you to my staff for being here. We're 5 days out from the election, so I'm saying some early thank yous to all those who've supported me, and especially my sister Chris, who houses me every time I'm up in this neck of the woods. It's really comforting to have family when you're on the campaign trail for months and months and months and months, and to have someplace familiar to go. I have been on the road for a long time now, but I know there are people here who don't really know me very well, so I'm really pleased that you came. And I got to make sure I keep that out of the way. Were you all right with that? Okay. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about my experience, my professional credentials, a little bit about the Treasurer's Office, a little bit about where I see the future going. It's kind of funny because I'm from Cincinnati. I've been in Cincinnati for a very long time, but I was actually born in Buffalo. So a town not very different from Cleveland. I grew up in a small town in the suburbs of Buffalo, right on Lake Erie. Youngest of 5 kids. We went to public schools, and pretty much everybody's dad worked at Bethlehem Steel. When I was in high school, the steel plant closed, and a lot of dads were out of work. It was devastating to our community, and I know that pattern has happened, that same scenario has happened across Ohio and across the Northeast and the Midwest. It was devastating for us. It left very little opportunity for a girl like me. So, I had to look at my future. I always wanted to go to college, and my parents strongly encouraged that. But we didn't have money for kid number 1, let alone kid number 5. So I did what every red-blooded 17-year-old American girl did. I joined ROTC. So I put myself through college with that ROTC scholarship. I also worked and took out student loans. And when I graduated, I pinned on my commission and I went off into the wild blue yonder. At that young age, I just knew the Air Force was my ticket to see the world. And right away, I got to go to Biloxi, Mississippi. Then I went to Grand Forks, North Dakota. So I did serve for 8 years on active duty, and I was also stationed overseas. I landed here in Ohio. I landed in Cincinnati, where I met my husband, Paul, and we raised our children, Kayla and Talon. Now, while I was on active duty, I got promoted to the rank of captain, and I also earned my MBA. That's why I went to the University of North Dakota. Didn't everybody here want to go to the University of North Dakota? We used to call it the beacon of hope on the prairie. So after my kids were born, I graduated from law school, and then I practiced for about 13 years, including banking law. And gee whiz, wouldn't it be nice to have a state treasurer who had an MBA and knew something about banks? Seems like it'd be very appropriate. Now, in 2008, I was elected to the state legislature. Now, I don't know if everybody here knows this, but Cincinnati is not exactly a bastion of Democratic politics. I'm related to all 4 Democrats in Cincinnati. So I won what had long been a Republican seat in the state house, and it put a political target on my back. In 2010, they sent the founder of the state Cincinnati Tea Party to run against me. Now, if you look back 4 years ago in 2010, it was a bad year for Democrats all across the country. But I focused on the issues that my constituents talked about, education and jobs. And at the end of the night, when the polls closed, I had a whopping 5-vote margin. Not 5 points, 5 votes. Now, after all the lawsuits, I picked up another 600, and so for me, it was a great victory. For my opponent, it was a narrow defeat. In 2012, they redrew my district to make it 56% Republican, so tougher race for me. I focused on jobs and education because that's what the people in my district talk about. And I would wager that's what people in your neighborhoods talk about too. At the end of the race that year, I'm very proud to say that in a three-way race, I got 52% of the vote. So 52% of that district chose to send me back. And look, it's these experiences, going into the Air Force. I joined ROTC when I was 17. Participated all through college, and 8 years of full-time active duty in those formative years in your early 20s, that really shaped me as a professional. And then running in these tough districts, I learned that there's not a Democratic way or a Republican way of doing things. There's just the right way. That's what I've tried to do in the legislature, and that's what I'd like to do as your next treasurer. Sometimes people run for office and they introduce measures, or they take actions, or they say things and give speeches, even introduce programs that are designed to take credit or to get their name up in lights or keep score. It's nothing about that. It's about delivering results. It's about fighting for your constituents. And that's what is sorely lacking these days. So look, that's a little bit about my resume. I'm going to tell you what motivates me to do more. So when I was practicing law, I represented a woman named Jean who was disabled and had lost her health insurance. Then her son was diagnosed with cancer, and she was desperate and got sucked in by a predatory lender who said, just refinance your house, we'll get some cash back, we'll get you, you'll be able to pay the doctor, it'll solve all of your problems. Well, of course, by the time that guy was done with her, he had mortgaged her house to the hilt, paid himself thousands of dollars in fees, and left her with a mortgage payment that took 80% of her income and netted her about $1,500 to pay the doctor. She was in foreclosure. There are thousands of Jeans across the state of Ohio. This region here, the Cleveland region, #1 in foreclosures in the country. Thousands of Jeans across the country and across the state. I'm very proud of the work I did to help Jean. I was able to help her keep her home. But I'm running against this year Josh Mandel, who cozies up to the same sort of predatory lenders who take advantage of women like Jean every single day. Instead of going to work, he was off in the Bahamas having a fundraiser with payday lenders. I don't trust someone like that to run our state's financial literacy programs, and you shouldn't either. So let's talk about the treasurer. It's the most important office that pretty much nobody talks about. You don't talk about it around the dinner table, do you? I guarantee you in my place we do. In my home we do. Those 3 times I was home this year for dinner. So look, the treasurer is where all the money comes in and all the money goes out. $200 billion under the authority of the state treasurer. And here comes some new people. It'll cost you $1 to come in. Come on in. It's the treasurer's race, so we're talking about. But look, it's a great office, and it can do a lot of service to help improve Ohio's bottom line. The #1 duty for the state treasurer: safeguard your money. #1 duty, and that's going to be my #1 priority and my top focus from the first day I take office until the day I leave. The treasurer also has a very serious responsibility to safeguard our state pension systems. 1.8 million Ohioans rely on these pensions. They've paid into them every month for 30, 40 years. That money's got to be there in their old age. And the treasurer also has a really important role in growing the economy. Some very powerful tools in that office. My favorite one is called Grow Now. It helps small businesses expand their workforce and to acquire new equipment so that we can actually develop more jobs and grow the economy in Ohio. But if we're going to accomplish any of that, we really need a treasurer who wants to be treasurer. Someone who's going to show up every day focused on the job at hand. And when I think about our current treasurer, Josh Mandel, his focus has been anywhere but. We know he was in office just a few months before he started running for the United States Senate. And he missed the first 14 Board of Deposit meetings. Now, these happen once a month. This is the main duty of the treasurer, to go to these meetings. There's only 3 people on the board. I think people noticed that he wasn't there. And also, he's supposed to run those meetings. This is the meeting where we decide where our money's going to be invested. And he couldn't bother to show up to do the number one thing that the people of Ohio entrusted him to do. Of course, we also know he hired his unqualified friends to important positions and had to spend taxpayer dollars to give them just the basic training in Finance 101 so they could do the job. But we can do, that all happened in the first part of his tenure. Let's talk about what's happened since 2012, because you'll learn that he really hasn't changed. After losing his Senate run, Josh Mandel, his first act was to rehire his campaign staff and give them raises, some as much as 15%. It's the office has become a parking place for his political campaign supporters. It should not be a parking place for anyone's political ambitions. It should be above that. We can do better. Then Josh Mandel created this award called Ohio Strong, which I actually thought was a great idea because it highlights how important manufacturing is to our economy and lets people know that the treasurer does have a role in economic development. But then the Associated Press reported that he used the award to publicly thank GOP donors and then to recruit new ones for his campaign. We can do better than that. This year, Josh Mandel became the first statewide office holder ever in Ohio history to use your money for self-promoting campaign-style telephone town halls. The independent experts called this electioneering. The Cleveland Plain Dealer editorialized on these town halls, saying, well, gee, he waited till just a few months before Election Day to start doing these, and they sure smell like campaigning to us. And they called on him to stop. But he didn't. He just had more. He has spent over $125,000 of your money on these self-promoting town halls. So, look, none of this even touches on Benjamin Suarez. Now, we know that in the sworn testimony of the trial of Mr. Suarez that Josh Mandel met with Benjamin Suarez privately in his home. And as a result of that meeting, Josh Mandel took action to intervene and basically threaten another state with legal action. And 3 days later, $100,000 began to flow into his campaign account. No wonder people are fed up with politicians. You need look no further than Josh Mandel to see how bad it can get. We learned it costs $100,000 to have access to the state treasurer's letterhead. This is the Treasury. This is not a game. This is your money. We can do better. We have got to do better in the treasurer's office. We need someone who's focused on doing the job, doing it the right way, not on some Democratic way or Republican way. There's nothing red or blue about balancing the state's checkbook. It's about green. We need someone who's a committed public servant, and it's just high time to take the politics out of that office. So for over a decade, let's talk about this office. For over a decade, politics have had an undue influence in the treasurer's office and have affected decisions that are made in that office. Now, I told you what happened under Josh's reign, but it didn't start there. The previous deputy treasurer, a Democrat, fled the office to avoid going to prison. 10 years ago, under Treasurer Joe Dieters, a Republican, a couple of his staffers were convicted of crime. For some reason, it might be because there's $200 billion involved, but for some reason, the Treasurer's office attracts these political shenanigans in a place where we should never have them, ever. And no one's offered any idea to stop that. But I have an idea. Let's install an inspector general of the Treasury, someone who's an independent watchdog who will prevent, detect, respond to any kind of instances of fraud, waste, and abuse, including the type of political shenanigans we have seen for the last 10 years. Thanks. Now, I'll tell you a little bit more about my idea. In my vision, the Inspector General will be appointed by the 4 legislative leaders, so by definition, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. That would preserve independence. And the Treasurer would be a resource to, not just to me, but to everybody in the Treasurer's office and any citizen in Ohio to run ideas and concerns by. And you know what? I based this off of legislation I introduced twice in the General Assembly. So it's not an idea that I just came up with. It's something I've been thinking about for a long time. And given the way the office has been run lately, I think it's high time we have an independent watchdog in that office. I mean, that's the kind of idea, that's the kind of approach you're going to see from me as treasurer. So I've just laid out some differences between Josh Mandel and me. And I'm glad that Stephanie, wherever she went to, did tell you that he was invited to this event. I accepted the invitation of the City Club on June 13th. 3 months later, Josh Mandel finally made a decision that he wasn't going to come. But it still is a shame that he's not here. He's AWOL as usual because it's just another pattern and practice of Josh Mandel not showing up to where the people need him to be. Maybe he thought it was a board of deposit meeting. I don't know. Well, all jokes aside, I wish he would have come and talked about his side of things. But in the absence of debates, one of the fundamental things of democracy in America, there are some people who have had a chance to hear Josh's point of view as well as my point of view. People who've sat us sometimes in the same room, well, once in the same room, but sat us down for an hour and a half at a time, asked us probing questions, cross-examined us about our positions, our background, our ideas, our vision. And those folks have already weighed in on this election. The votes are in. 20 newspapers across Ohio have endorsed my campaign. 20 newspapers have said, it's time for a change in the Treasurer's office because we can do better, and we should do better. Thanks. This is where your money's kept. As the Cleveland Plain Dealer, I'm very proud. Josh's hometown newspaper and your hometown newspaper endorsed me. I'm really proud of that. My hometown newspaper, the Cincinnati Enquirer, endorsed me. And 18 other papers across the state, every corner of the state, newspapers have said it's time to restore integrity and trust in the Treasurer's office. They know the same thing you know, that if we keep electing the same kind of extreme folks, we're going to get what we see in Washington. We're going to see gridlock. We're going to see speeches and ideas put forth just for partisan political gain. We're going to see people jockeying for position for the next political campaign they want to run for, the next office they want to hold. We're going to see just such grandstanding that gets in the ways of all kinds of things. One of the things I've championed in the State House is our veterans issues and taking care of military families. And even there, we have political grandstanding. You shouldn't have any of that. Because we've got to do better. Now, I love talking about my 2010 race. That was a great victory because, that's the year I was up by 5 votes. And when you are ahead, when you have I call it, I didn't really win by 5, but that was the vote total for several weeks until they got through the first round of lawsuits and counted the ballots. 5 votes made a difference in that race. And I got those 5 votes because I had volunteers out knocking on doors, reminding my supporters to go vote. They were out on Election Day, and the last door knock was at 7:20 p.m. That voter had forgotten to vote and thought the polls had already closed. But my volunteer, Ann Neuer, said, no, you have 10 minutes. The voter got in her car and drove down the street and cast her last vote. We estimate maybe 7:24 p.m. I got my 5th vote. Every vote counts. So I want to make sure that, you're going to get me 5 more votes this year, and you're going to get me 5. Will you get me 5 more? I think you already have. Will you get me 5 more votes? 5 more votes over here, 5 more votes? This is how elections are won. One vote at a time, by talking to people personally about what's at stake. So I think I'm just going to say, before we go into the Q&A, think about what's at stake, because we can do better. The Air Force taught me, hitting my mic there. The Air Force taught me that there's not a Democratic way or Republican way, there's just the right way. And that's the approach we've got to take when we're thinking about our next leaders, when we're thinking about the future of the state. Let's find someone who's focused on doing things the right way, because we can do better. Thanks very much. I leave it here? Okay.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are enjoying a candidate forum with Democratic candidate for Treasurer of Ohio, Connie Pillich. We welcome all of you here and those joining us via our live webcast sponsored by the University of Akron. Be sure to tune in to our Friday forums on 90.3 WCPN, WVIZ PBS, 104.9 WCLV Idea Stream, or one of the many radio stations across the region and country that carry City Club programs. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Tomorrow, Friday, October 31st, the City Club will host a panel discussion on turning the tide on sexual assault. For more information about our upcoming and past forums, please visit us online at cityclub.org. Today's debate, actually it's a forum, is sponsored by the Northeast Ohio Media Group, the City Club's sponsor of politics and policy programming. We thank you for your support. Today we welcome guests at a table hosted by the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party. We thank all of you for your support. And now I'd like to introduce M.L. Schultze, digital editor and reporter for WKSU, who will pose questions to Representative Pillich. I turn it over to you, Ms. Schultze.
Actually, what we're going to be doing is turning it over to all of you as soon as possible. Unfortunately, when there are no debates, we run the risk of the sound of one hand clapping. You guys are going to make sure that does not happen. You have talked about a history in the Treasurer's office of problems under Democrats and Republicans. You say Suarez, he says Ahmed. But as you pointed out, there's problems that go back longer than that. And yet, for most Ohioans, it hasn't really registered that there were problems or that those problems cost people. Can you explain a little bit more about why it's a problem?
Well, I think anytime you're talking about $200 billion, it's a problem if there's some sort of dishonesty, some kickbacks, some mismanagement, some shenanigans like that. So, look, when I talked a little bit about the Treasurer's office and how important it is, I hope everybody would like to think that the folks who handle their bank account, their personal bank account, they're making sure the money's safe and secure. And that's the number one thing you ask of any banker. The Treasurer is just like that. The Treasurer is the state's banker, keeping the account for the people of Ohio. So it's very, very important that we make sure we put the right people in place. Let me talk a little bit about the IG, and then I'll talk a little bit about my vision for running that office. So the Inspector General, of course, needs to be an independent watchdog. And in my mind, the only way you can really be independent if you have two different political parties appointing them. So a bipartisan appointment process would ensure that we work together to get a really strong individual in there. Someone with a history of experience in leadership and investigation. someone who's going to be a resource for not just for me to run ideas by and concerns by, but for every person in the office. Kind of like the Air Force used to have a suggestion program, an anonymous way to communicate ideas or complaints without fear of retribution. And that would be the IG's role as well. But the IG would also be a resource for the entire public, including the press. It's a way for the people of Ohio to make me accountable for doing my job. Now, if I'm on the job every day and I'm paying attention to what's going on and to managing the state's investment portfolio, it's going to be smart to have an extra set of eyes there that's truly an independent watchdog. So I want to go ahead if you...
No, go ahead.
Okay. So, you know, when politicians talk a long time sometimes, so I'll try to do this right. So when I think about what I will bring to this office, I look back to the 30 years of work experience that I bring. I have real-world experience setting up a strong organization. I got the best leadership training in the world as an officer in the Air Force. I have an MBA. Those two things alone tell you I know how to solve problems. I also ran my own law firm and practiced in banking law, so I have great credentials there. But having run a branch in the Air Force, that's what we called our office, a branch. Having run my own law firm, I know how to set up an effective organization, put the right people in place, and get the best performance out of them when they're there. When I was on active duty, I was recognized as leading the best combat crew communications branch in the Air Force, 2 years running. And so that's the kind of leadership I'm going to bring to this office.
Let's talk a little further. You spoke with great passion of Jean. You speak of women's issues that matter in the legislature. You seem to outline policies and positions you've held that seem to blend very well. But when you talk about becoming treasurer, what do you do for the Jeans of this world? Or what do you do on those women's issues? How do they come together? They seem disparate.
Let's talk about the Jeans of the world, and there are many variations of Jean. Jean lost her home because she was duped by a predatory lender, but there are many other people who are in financial straits, and they are in every neighborhood, and they're in every income level. When I was practicing law, I represented the poor, I represented the wealthy, and everyone in between. And the common thread among them all was they needed help managing the financial crises of their lives. And the treasurer can help before it becomes a crisis. The treasurer has programs to teach young people of the importance of saving, to teach seniors how to manage their retirement, to educate everyone about the dangers of predatory lenders, to educate students about the dangers of getting credit cards at a young age before they know how to balance that. These are really important and powerful tools that the treasurer can bring to help women and men and families, young and old, in Ohio.
Do you see anything that doesn't exist now that you'd like to have as part of that office?
Well, one of my ideas is to partner with the Ohio State Extension, because they do have financial literacy programs that I've researched for my constituents and my neighbors as favors, and their programs are tried and true. I'm certainly going to partner with them. But look, whenever you come into a new office, the first thing, I learned this in the military, the first thing you do is a leadership review. You're going to evaluate everything. You're going to review all the procedures, all the written documents, all the policies, interview all the department heads, a very thorough review to see what's working and what's not. This happens in every military post that I've been involved in. And we're also going to institute self-inspections. It's going to be part of my reorganization of the office will be to make sure that we have checks and balances in place so that the people of Ohio can feel comfortable that there's someone who actually cares about what's going on in that office.
You've been very critical here and elsewhere of Mr. Mandel's choice of staffers, saying it's basically been a place, you use the word park, to park political appointees. He comes back and says, well, you've hired political appointees as your aides. Explain the difference.
That's really fun. So I get to hire one person as my legislative aide. As a legislator, I have a staff of one. And this person has to be smart. They have to be able to communicate. They have to be able to read and write, research, and be a self-starter. Lots of great skills. Whoever I hire has to go through the Human Relations Department and has to be approved before I can even interview them. That's one difference. They make about $30,000 a year. So not a great wage. The treasurer's office is very technical. Most of the jobs in that office have a very technical definition, and you absolutely have to have the right skills in order to do the job there. I can tell you to compare that, my poor little legislative aide, against someone who comes into the office, gets a job created for him, and gets a nice hefty $60,000, $80,000 salary. It's just laughable that you would compare that. When I do hire people in the treasurer's office, I'm going to make sure first that they have the qualifications to apply for the job. They got to have the skills, the technical training for each job. But number two, and probably maybe this should be number one, they have to have a commitment to public service. They have to be someone who wants to stay in that role. People are not going to be moving in and out of my office to jump off onto the next campaign. It's just not going to work that way.
Going from policy to politics, as you look at your campaign, what political ad are you most proud of? What message are you most proud of?
I just can't help it. I'm the most proud of the one with my children. When they did that ad for me, that was our first ad, and I saw what it looked like. I said, you know what? Nothing else matters. I love my kids. I'm so proud of them. My son did say when it was all done, he said, "Mom, please don't make me do this again." Yeah, I'm really most proud of that.
Did you promise him?
No, I said, look, if you want me to pay your college tuition, we'll talk about it after a while.
You and other down-ticket Democrats have suffered for problems at the top of the tickets, or at least perceived problems at the top of the ticket. How have you campaigned given that fact?
Well, look, all the political pundits in the state are going to talk about these things, but I want to tell you that we have great candidates. And these down-ticket races are so important. The Constitution says we have to have these offices. And some really smart people sat down and figured this out a long, long time ago. And they're very important. The Attorney General, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, should be protecting consumers like Gene, all the Genes in Ohio, should be the protector in chief. David Pepper, I've known him for years. He's from my neck of the woods. He's probably one of the most highly respected elected officials in Cincinnati, a great city councilman and a very effective executive. He would be a tremendous Attorney General. The auditor has to keep the books for every municipality, every village, every city, every county has their books examined by the auditors. All the people in Ohio depend on an effective auditor. That's why I'm so glad John Carney's running. And Nina Turner, my goodness, talk about someone who has fought for reform. When Cleveland schools were being reformed, Nina Turner was out in front fighting for them. When it was time to dismantle a corrupt form of government, the biggest corruption scandal we've had in county government that I ever heard of, she was the one who bucked the system and fought to have that done. Why wouldn't we want to have a fighter like that who knows truth, who knows the importance of that office, the Secretary of State office, who's going to protect people? Why wouldn't we do that? Thanks. And I am so proud to be on the stump with those people. Look, we need to have people running who are concerned about the future of Ohio. People who are not running for office because they think it's going to help them get to the next one. We need people running who are committed public servants, and everyone I just mentioned fits that bill. That's the type of public servants. We should be so glad and honored that they are running and giving people a choice and bringing the issues to the stump for the people of Ohio, because, gee whiz, not all the Republican candidates want to talk about the issues.
Jumping from politics back to policy, why is the Treasurer's office an elected office?
Our Constitution says it is.
Should it be?
Well, I'll let the Constitutional Modernization Committee decide that. But right now it is. And you know what? It is a great idea to have someone separate looking at your money and caring for and safeguarding your money. You can run into problems when you have only one person, like a governor, who's appointing all of these offices, because they can become political appointments. And this is one of the reasons I think we need to have an inspector general that's a bipartisan appointee. You need an independent watchdog. You don't need a lapdog that's a political appointee to do these things. So I think, right now having these, I realize they're not the most glamorous jobs on the ballot, but they are really important. These are the nuts and bolts of how our state is run. Who's caring for the money? Who's watching over? Who's fighting for you? These are the nuts and bolts. So I think it's great that we do have elected positions.
Your hometown paper, in putting together some summaries of different races, did the treasurer's race, Why Should You Care? And they gave 3 reasons. The first reason was because this one's kind of sort of close. The polls are showing it as relatively close. You give me the other 2 reasons that you think people should care about this race.
Well, number one, this is where the money is kept. This is where your money is. It's your money. You should have someone there you trust, someone you can rely on, someone who actually wants to be there. That would be number one. And number 2, I would have to say that the treasurer certainly is, well, I mean, there are a number of other reasons. Those are the main 2 reasons. But among the other reasons are how important it is to protect our pension system for the 1.8 million Ohioans who rely on that and their families. And the economic development arm of that office, one of the things that really attracts me to this office is how much you can be of service by using that economic development wing in that office. How much help you can be. How you can help to small business owners, to seniors, to young families, to students, to everybody, to farmers, all sorts of people. There are ways you can help them, and I touched on this a little bit ago, but to help businesses grow, help them expand their workforce, help them figure out how to get the best mileage on their dollar by improving financial literacy, teaching seniors to manage their retirement so they can grow old with dignity, teaching young people how to save for their first car and how to figure out a scheme of a predatory lender or a consumer credit card company that's trying to take advantage of them, how they can become successful and later in life. There's so much you can do to help in that office.
You mentioned pensions. How satisfied are you with the way the pension money is invested now?
The pension board sets the pension investment policy. And so the treasurer has very little impact on that. The treasurer does have appointment authority to the pension board, but the treasurer is considered the custodian of the pension and decides where it's going to be parked, what banks hold it, and negotiates the bank fees and administrative costs for handling that.
So you're okay with that setup, that structure?
That's up to the legislature how that's going to be. But right now, let me just say that every decision I make as treasurer and as custodian will be aiming towards making sure those pensions are there in a very healthy and robust way for the long term for the people that rely on them.
Okay. We'll now begin our traditional City Club question and answer period. We're encouraging you to formulate your questions for our speaker and remind you that your questions should be questions, short and to the point, not speeches. We welcome questions from everyone. Holding the microphones today is Marketing and Outreach Specialist Kirsten Pianka. Yes?
Thanks. Thanks for coming to Cleveland, Connie. So my question is that, we're inundated with these political ads. And I want to know what you think about your opponents touting his accomplishments in light of the fact that even the Columbus Dispatch has called it breathtaking in its audacity for his claims to success. In Cleveland, we may or may not know that the Columbus Dispatch is not necessarily a liberal newspaper. So if you could just give us your thoughts on your response to that, I'd appreciate it.
Well, look, that's a great question. And we saw in his previous 2 campaigns that no matter what anybody says about his ads, Josh Mandel will continue to run them and will stick to the same talking points no matter how many times they're torn apart. But I find it very entertaining when I see Josh Mandel's accomplishments. He talks about eliminating an $8 billion debt. He talks about balancing the state budget. He talks about improving the enterprise bond fund. And he talks about improving our financial ranking, 43rd to 7th. Very impressive numbers. But like much of what Josh Mandel says, it's a bunch of bunk. And I love the Columbus Dispatch who called this ad breathtaking in its audacity. Because, all right, let's look at these a couple things. Well, let's see. First of all, the state of Ohio did not have an $8 billion debt eliminated. We have about $9 billion in debt right now. So I think maybe Josh was trying to talk about our deficit, our projected deficit. This is our chief financial officer, doesn't understand the difference between debt and deficit, and that should scare you right there. But what he's probably talking about is he's saying he balanced the state budget. And I bet everybody in this room, and probably everybody listening, remembers that in grade school they were taught that the legislature does the budget, passes the budget bill. And you know, by law we have to balance our budget. We're not Washington. We don't print money. We have to balance our budget. So I love that one. I really enjoy when he says he improved the ranking of the enterprise bond fund. You know, that's a general revenue bond, not a general obligation bond. Again, the chief fiscal officer ought to be able to know the difference between those things. And particularly since the treasurer doesn't have nothing to do with a general obligation bond. And the national ratings agency that evaluated this bond didn't look at anything that the treasurer did. So, all right, strike number 3. But my favorite has got to be how he improved the state's financial ranking from 43rd to 7th. So I'm an MBA. I was taught that your decisions are only as reliable as the data on which you base them. So I read the studies. The first one is a snapshot of pension liabilities per capita. The second one is an average of 11 weighted accounting measures like the quick ratio, the current ratio, the cash ratio. You know, as a business grad, I know what these are. They have nothing to do with each other. They measure different things. It's like saying we used to have 43 apples and now we have 7 oranges. If I had made that kind of analysis in business school, I would have been laughed out of the building. So, but that's just another pattern and practice of Josh Mandel saying what he wants you to hear, whether or not it's true.
Thank you, Connie, for being here. I just wish your opponent were here, too. But my question is, I would like you to talk a little bit about the investments of the state treasurer and what you think is good and what you think that you would change.
Well, thank you so much for that question. This is what's so interesting about the treasurer's office, investment policy. So, of course, the number one job. There are 3 prongs in my three things in my investment policy. Number 1 is to keep your money safe. It's got to be there no matter what. And that's why the revised code in Ohio says you can only invest in certain types of things. So we're just going to invest in safe instruments. Number 2, liquidity. I got to be able to pay the bills. The treasurer pays all the bills of the state, so I got to have cash. And number 3 is yield. When that money's being invested, I want it to make as much money for you, the people of Ohio. Every dollar, every minute of every day needs to be invested to get the best return on our money. So that could mean sweep accounts, short-term instruments, long-term notes, whatever mix gets us the best return, provided we adhere to rules number 1 and 2, safety and liquidity. But you do have to have a hands-on treasurer in order to do the best thing. And let me give you an example of why this is important. Right now, Treasurer Mandel has increased our holdings in commercial paper to $1.6 billion. And I'm not criticizing that, because commercial paper historically has a great return. It's backed up by private equity firms that historically, that rarely go under. Unfortunately, that number is not 0. Case in point, Lehman Brothers. So imagine back a few years ago in 2008 when Wall Street was collapsing and all these private equity firms were going under. If we had had significant holdings in a firm like Lehman Brothers. Fortunately, Richard Cordray was our treasurer at the time. He was paying attention, and he divested all but $99 million from commercial paper, and we were able to avoid suffering from the collapse of Lehman Brothers. Imagine how difficult it would have been to get through the recession if he hadn't done that. You got to have a hands-on treasurer. You got to have someone who understands what's going on, someone with an eye for detail who actually wants to do the job. That's why it's important.
Thanks for coming. The treasurer's office, of course, is an independent office, but it has to relate to the rest of the cabinet, or not the cabinet, but the other officials, including the governor. Can the governor impact the treasurer's office, and how do you insulate it from those kinds of political influences that undoubtedly he or she would try to implement?
Well, first of all, let me talk about my history of bipartisan cooperation. So I represent a Republican district. I've won it 3 times. And I bring to the legislature the tools I learned in the Air Force. I mean, I talked about this because it's really important to me that there's not a Democratic way or a Republican way of doing things. There's just the right way. And that is extremely true in the Treasurer's office, too, because it's about the money. When I went to the legislature, I immediately set about building relationships on both sides of the aisle. And it was very effective for me. 80% of the bills I introduced in my first term got bipartisan support. Now, the Democrats held the House then, so I was in the majority in the House, but we had a Republican Senate. In my second 2 terms, we're in a pretty severe minority. But those relationships that I have built over the last 6 years have helped me to continue to be effective for my district. I'm going to take those relationships and that work ethic with me to the Treasurer's office. And that's why I believe I'll be able to work with whoever is in office.
Thank you for coming to Cleveland, and good luck in your campaign. Are there any bills now pending in the General Assembly or likely to be introduced in the next term that would bring needed reform to the Treasurer's office beyond what you could do in your capacity as Treasurer if elected?
I don't know of any. Perhaps some of my colleagues recall some, but I don't recall any bills pending that would do something beyond my capacity as Treasurer. I can talk to you about my bill to expand the authority of the current Inspector General to include all of the statewide offices, the Auditor, the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, and the Treasurer. I've had one hearing, so we've had one committee hearing, but it's probably dead in the water. But I don't need the legislature to create an Inspector General of the Treasury. As the CEO of the Treasury, I'm the leader of that office. I can structure the office in the way I deem most suited to bring the maximum benefit to the people of Ohio. And it will certainly include the Inspector General and some of the other reforms I talked about.
Thank you. We know that the current treasurer has collected money from around the country for his various campaigns, and even heard that some of his investment policies seem to be consistent with the interest of those donors. But I wonder how you would, or is there a way that you can use your investment policy to help working families in Ohio? Is there anything you would do in that line?
Well, the investment policy helps everybody in Ohio because the money's got to be there to pay the state's bills. The treasurer is the banker. The General Assembly tells me what checks to write. The governor tells me what checks to write. So it's a supportive relationship, but certainly I am not making those decisions on where to spend the money. However, the treasurer does have programs to help small communities, help cities, villages, and schools to get a better return on their investments so that they have more money available to provide services at the local level. So.
Thank you.
You talked a little bit about your military background. Can you tell us how your military career has prepared you for the specific role of this office that you're seeking?
Well, thanks for that question, because the military was a huge part of my adult life. Well, in my young adult life, too. I mean, I joined ROTC when I was 17. I participated in ROTC all 4 years of college. I went on active duty full-time in the Air Force for over 8 years. In those formative years, I mean, I grew and developed as a professional. I got the best leadership training in the world as a captain in the United States Air Force. And getting my MBA, of course, these things complement each other, but I certainly learned how to solve problems. I learned how to get the best out of people, how to make sure I put the right people in the right place. Now, the Air Force gives you the people you're going to work with. Your job is to get the best out of them. Now, I always like to say that, well, I know that they're in the Air Force, so they must be smart. So I always anticipated that they would be able to do the job. It was my job to bring the best out of them. And sometimes the circumstances were not ideal. When I was in Grand Forks, we lost, just because of transfers at that time, I lost my whole, in my branch, we lost all the senior NCOs. So I had these young airmen and one young buck sergeant who stepped up and filled in. And we were recognized for that. I got the top rating possible in our operational readiness inspection. You don't get those very often. I was really proud of that. I was recognized as leading the best combat crew communications branch in the Air Force. I did that 2 years in a row. I was really proud of that, and I'm proud of my team because we worked together. You know, but I think probably the thing that's most important is that you know, I learned that you shouldn't have any preconceptions about how things have to be done. I worked with people from Philadelphia. I worked with people from Texas. There's not a Philadelphia way or Texas way of doing things. There's not a Democratic way or a Republican way of doing things. There's just the right way. Keeping the mission as first and foremost in your focus is what you have to do, and that's the approach I'm going to bring to the Treasurer's Office.
If I could play off her question just for a second. You said the people stepped up. What did you do that helped them step up?
Well, the first thing I did was treat them with respect and convey to them in all of our interactions that I believed in them. I made sure they were completely trained and had all the resources that I could provide to them or that my squadron could provide to them. Sometimes I had to pull airmen out of other branches to come in and fill in, and so we had an ongoing training program to do that. But they were young. I believed in them. I made sure they had all the tools they had. I provided advice and guidance, and I also like I'm a student of management and leadership. I also tried to make sure they got the positive feedback that they need so they would know when they're doing something right. I think the 1 minute manager calls that catching someone doing something right. So you try to make sure you notify them of that behavior and commend them on it. But you know, my management style is what I call the contingency method. This is something I learned in business school. You know, there are going to be times when you provide a lot of support and guidance, and there are going to be times when you just let them do the job and you monitor from afar. It really depends on the situation.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay. We're 5.5 days, 5 1/3 days out now from Election Day. What can you do in these next 5 days to make a difference in the election?
Well, let's look at where we are. Let's just look at where we are. This is a head-to-head race, me versus Josh Mandel. And what we know is that Josh Mandel's name recognition is high. So are his negatives. My name recognition is growing. My negatives are low. The newspapers have already voted by endorsing me, 20 newspapers across the state. I think if I had to choose which place to be in 5 days out from the election, Josh Mandel's position or mine, I'd want to be me. The only thing that Josh Mandel can do, the only thing that Josh Mandel can do is what he has done in every statewide race he's ever run. Tear down his opponent. He can't, his negatives are too high for him to bring himself high because his negative reputation is stuck to his skin like glue. His only option is to tear down the opposition. We've seen it before and we'll see it. We've just seen it before time and time again. And that's what he's doing now. I, however, get to talk about the good things because I have a different background than Josh. I have a different record. And like I said, if I had to choose whose shoes I'd want to fill 5 days away from Election Day, Josh Mandel or me, I would want to be me. So, looking forward to Tuesday.
Is there anything else you want to share with us?
Well, I do have some closing remarks, if that's okay. You know, just first of all, thank you very much, Schultze, for being here and running this and moderating this, and for the City Club for putting this on, and for everybody who came here. It means a great deal to me to see people who are this interested and engaged in the treasurer's race. I think it's the most important race, but I know there are a lot of other important races out there. I do want to close by telling you a story about one of my professors in business school. Now, we all have a favorite professor, right? Somewhere down the line. I had one who'd come in, I swear it was every class, or it seemed like every class, and he would say, "There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. Somebody, somewhere, somehow, some way paid for that food." Every day we hear this. And so, but of course his point was that everything you do has a cost. Whether it's providing lunch at a meeting or something simple like that, or something as complicated as crafting a business partnership agreement. And the same holds true in the Treasurer's office. You know, we've seen some of the decisions Josh Mandel made with getting involved with Benjamin Suarez, his telephone town halls, his hiring practices, his attendance practices. It's really hard to understand in any way that he actually considered the costs of those decisions when he made them. You know, we can do better. We have to do better. We need someone in that office with an eye for detail. Someone who knows what she's doing, who knows what the office does, who knows the difference between debt and deficit, and a general obligation bond and a general revenue bond. And these are basic things. We need someone who actually wants to be there. And so, you know, that's what I bring to the table, because I think really at the end of the day, when you lay your head on the pillow, you need to be able to rest assured that there's someone in Columbus fighting for us. Someone who is going to safeguard our tax dollars, protect our pension, and do everything she can to grow the economy. And that's the commitment I bring to everyone in this room, to everyone listening or watching, to all the people of Ohio. That's why I'm running. And I thank you for the time to be here.
Thank you.
Today at the City Club, we've been enjoying a candidate forum with Democratic candidate for Treasurer of Ohio, Connie Pillich. Thank you, Ms. Pillich. Thank you, Ms. Schultze. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.